Saturday against Brentford was a marked improvement from all of the other home games we've seen so far in the Premier League under Thomas Frank. It was only the Burnley game where we generated more XG in a home game in the Premier League, and Burnley had their chances on Saturday. Brentford, we restricted to far less XG than what Burnley created in that game. It was so much better in every metric, on the eye, everything. It passed the test, and Thomas Frank's changes made Tottenham a hell of a lot better. It's what we've kind of been calling for. But in this video, after we did a breakdown on the channel yesterday about why those changes worked, I want to talk in this video about how we can kind of move forward and see this game plan kind of be enabled more sustainably, because there will be times where we come up against teams who sit in a deeper block like Brentford did at times on Saturday, but Brentford also pressed us. We know we can play through teams that press us like this. We've got all of the tools to do that, right? We saw that with Mickey van der Ven, but we've also got the tools to play through lower blocks. And I think Thomas Frank has to stick to the setup that we saw on Saturday in those kind of games, because they have been his kryptonite so far, right? Welcome back to the channel. If you are new, please make sure to subscribe, like the video as well. Let me know what you think in the comments. As always, thanks so much for all the support on YouTube recently. It feels really good to be back at it and in the swing of things. And if you've got any video ideas for me that you want to see do leading up to January or anything like that over the course of the next week outside of the normal match preview and breakdown stuff, this will kind of double up as a bit of a preview for Slavia Prague as well. But please do let me know what you want to see in the comments, and also go and watch the in-depth breakdown we made on the game yesterday, where we focused on some of these bits, but I want to talk about how we can deploy them more sustainably. Now, as I said, right, if you look at the numbers, Tottenham generated 2.2 XG at home to Brentford on Saturday. It was the second most we've had in a Premier League game so far at home this season, or third most in any game. We're basically the same as what we did against Burnley, 3.3 against Copenhagen, which we saw a very similar setup to this, and I want to touch on that in this video slightly later on as well, because in the game against Copenhagen, we saw a different wing pairing to what we saw on Saturday. We saw Destiny Udogie and Wilson Odobert in that game, and in the game against Brentford, we saw Randall Kolo Muani out on the left with Djed Spence at left back too. And the injury to Destiny Udogie has slightly kind of complicated things in the sense that I think Destiny Udogie gives Tottenham more from an attacking point of view on that left-hand side in these games where we want to be more dominant than Djed Spence. However, I thought Djed Spence was really impressive on Saturday, and if Thomas Frank can set us up in a way that he isn't playing with someone like Brennan Johnson or maybe like Xavi Simons out on this left-hand side, who isn't comfortable at holding the width, isn't comfortable just staying out on the touchline, I do think this can work with Djed Spence on the left-hand side. I've always said that I think we look better with Udogie in the team, but I do think if Spence can play like he did on Saturday and Spurs can set up in this similar way when we talk about lower blocks, but we also talk about when we play on transition as well, I do think the relationship that Spence and Muani could develop, or Spence and Odobert could develop, is key, because Muani and Odobert are both comfortable holding the width, staying on the touchline. I don't think Tell is, I don't think Johnson is, and I don't think Xavi Simons is either. So there is a workaround kind of to be had there, and I do think the dynamic that these guys had actually contributed quite a lot to the game on Saturday. Now, like I said, we will face lower blocks on a more consistent basis, right? We know that we can play through the press of teams, but how do we play through teams that are going to sit in against us a little bit more than Brentford did on Saturday, even though they did drop into this kind of shape at times where they defended in kind of a 5-4-1. You got the 5 across the back line there. Collins, the left back, tucking in very narrow, with Schade kind of acting as that fifth defender, as almost the left back. Then you've got the 4 in midfield that are protecting that back line, trying to stop the players kind of in the pockets, kind of affecting the game, really. And then you've got Thiago kind of pressing as that kind of sole striker. But Tottenham were patient. They were good. It was much better than what we've seen so far against lower blocks than what we've seen already in these kind of games. And although Archie Gray wasn't involved as much necessarily in this kind of move and the ability to unpick Brentford, he has such a dramatic impact on the team and improvement when you look at his numbers. So Saturday, 5 passes into the final third, 50 touches, 1 touch in the opposition box. But if you look at his pass percentage from the game as well, Nathan Clark shared this on Twitter, basically, the highest percentage of his passes, or joint with passing the ball out to the right-hand side, were forwards rather than backwards. And when you look at our other midfielders so far, this season. And if you look at some of our other midfielders so far this season, João Palhinha, Lucas Bergvall and Rodrigo Bentancur, those progressive pass numbers are not good. Those forward pass percentage numbers are not good. Annoyingly, I can't stick Archie Gray on this graph because he either doesn't come up on Data MB, or I think he might come up as a centre-back or something like that because of the way he played the games last season. Now, Lucas Bergvall is a bit of an outlier, really, because obviously he's been playing in the 10 more, and I think if we saw him in the pivot, I do think those progressive passes and forward pass numbers would be higher than what they're showing on the graph currently, but he's been playing in that 10 position. But it's more about, with Archie, about his intelligence in deeper areas to open up space to play through the press, which I kind of want to talk about later in this video. But I just kind of wanted to get that point about the progression, about how Spurs move forward in games like this, where teams like Brentford are sat in the way that they were at kind of those points, because I do think he can kind of come onto the ball in deeper areas and make things happen too. I think he is kind of almost a key cog in these games moving forward. But if you look at this kind of example, right, what Spurs did really well is it was the fluidity on that last line, which is something I also want to see a hell of a lot more of, with Mwani kind of tucking inside there, Spence holding the width. How many times do we see those guys kind of change positions? Simmons floating on the right. He has the position, the freedom to kind of go where he wants. Spurs, again, set up in this kind of 3-2-5 build-up shape where we've seen the best of our ability to progress the ball so far this season. Gray and Bentancur there in the pivot, and then Spence, Mwani, Richarlison, Simmons, Kudus kind of across that front line. This is where Spurs have looked their best. This is the kind of optimum in possession structure to create rotations and play through teams, whether that is in slightly deeper areas in a mid-block, or we're playing through the press, or also in these kind of situations too, because you get Xavi Simons in the area where he wants to be and where he can affect the game. And Romero loves being in these kind of situations, right? Xavi Simons here has the intelligence to drop into this space. And this is something that we analysed yesterday, but it's why Xavi Simons is so key and has to play in all of these games moving forward. And it was so frustrating why he didn't play against Fulham. Like, I got clowned a little bit for a tweet and a TikTok that I made, and it was a bit of a stupid thing to say in respect that I said if Tottenham had beaten Fulham, Wolves and Man United, would be 2 points behind where Arsenal are at right now. Now, obviously, football doesn't work like that. If my grandmother had wheels, she'd be a bike, blah, 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 all those kind of things. But that is just the reality for Tottenham, and those are games that we should be expecting to win, in my eyes, like especially Fulham and Wolves. And I think if we'd set up in the same manner that we did against Brentford, and also I think one of the things that was different with Brentford, there was an intensity, there was a bite. Maybe it was a little bit of a response to what we kind of saw last weekend against Fulham. Those players really wanted to put on a performance, but also the structure changed a lot from what we saw in those games. We can't play the 4-4-2 at home. We can't play Paulinho and Bentancur in these kind of home games moving forward. As I said, look at those progressive pass numbers and those forward pass percentage numbers. They are not good enough when you want to break down teams that are going to sit in, just be really happy to get a point. Going back to this, Simmons kind of drops into that space. Romero punches the ball through the lines. He is so key. All three centre-backs in build-up, if you like, Porro, Romero, Van der Ven, are so key in these kind of games. Obviously, Romero, we lost out against Fulham because of the suspension, but Danso just does not give you that ability to penetrate a low block in the same way. We also need Richarlison to kind of be firing on the cylinders that he was firing on in terms of his ability to link the play. On Saturday, it was so much better. But also this, just snappy one-touch passing. Richarlison bounces it into Simmons, and then Spurs can move the ball quickly from one side to the other, and Spencer's got space to cross the ball, right? And this is what I do really like, because I think a lot of times maybe Spence would just kind of float this ball into the box. That's kind of been our almost default kind of strategy so far this season. But also, you've worked into a good crossing position here. You're not just crossing it for the sake of crossing it because it feels like we have no other game plan. But I like this. This is what we want. This is where we want Xavi, in this kind of pocket, right? We need to facilitate this more in home games moving forward. The creativity there, the little flick around the corner. Yes, okay, it doesn't come off, but you want to see that kind of bravery. And that all comes from this kind of setup. This kind of setup. Simmons dropping in. Can he kind of come and receive in these kind of pockets? Richarlison, hold-up play. Again, Mwani can kind of come into that area. Richarlison, a bit of fluidity across that kind of front line is what we sort of want to see in these games and is paramount moving forward. That 3-2-5 allows for more fluidity, rotations, more options and more quality for these kind of passes to be picked out. Even Simmons kind of coming in here. Can he receive it there? Like just those three across that front especially. It feels like there's two width holders and then three that kind of have the freedom to rotate in the middle, even though we did see rotations between Mwani and Spence as well, which is something that I want to talk about. But that has to be the build-up structure moving forward in these kind of games. Now, obviously, like I said, we know that when teams come onto us a little bit more, we can play through that. But that's why getting the first goal in these kind of games is key, where you can kind of get through that block. The game opens up a little bit more. And again, this is what we need to be doing more of as well. When teams it's why Romero van der Ven again is so key. Van der Ven here. This is what I was saying about Archie Gray earlier. I don't think it's something that I touched on necessarily yesterday. Again, he's not done necessarily anything progressive in the build-up in terms of playing forwards, but his intelligence of the position that he knows where to drop into to create that space for Van der Ven to open it up. He's dragged Henderson out here towards him. That's given a clear passing lane for Van der Ven to give it to Xavi Simons in this kind of area where he can take it on the half turn and go. That is so key. And again, as I said, I think giving these two the freedom in these games moving forward to operate in kind of whatever positions they want, because they've got a hell of a lot of quality, that has to be something that we build around in these kind of games moving forward. And Spurs obviously move up the pitch and kind of get a chance off the back of that. And again, what this 3-2-5 also allows us to do, as I said, this is kind of the situation where we play through the press. Gray dragging Henderson out here just opens up all of this lovely space in the middle for these two. And we've got the ability to punch the ball through the lines. So, like I said, the initial objective is to open the game up against teams that do sit in lower blocks against us, and then we have got the firepower and the quality when teams do step onto us to really, really hurt them in transition. One thing also the 3-2-5 allows us to do moving forward is create space for the fullback on this left-hand side. And when you've got players with the running power that someone like Destiny Udogie has got and Djed Spence has got, it does really put you in a strong position to exploit the width, because you are kind of naturally with your other fullback kind of staying a little bit more narrow, as Porro does, kind of joins up as a centre-back in build-up. It does kind of shuffle the whole team a little bit over to this side, then creating the space. And when you've got a weapon like Van der Ven, who can just wrap this pass out first time into Djed Spence or Udogie, that's really powerful for Spurs. But as I said, this doesn't work as well, I don't think, when you've got someone like Johnson on the left-hand side, someone like Xavi on the left-hand side. That's kind of where we were going wrong in the early stages of the season. And I think that's something that Thomas Frank, I think, maybe has figured out now and kind of can kick us on from. You want players who are comfortable holding the width on outside that touchline, because Djed Spence wants to be in these pockets. He's also comfortable when he's driving into space, right? But against a slightly deeper block, he's not as comfortable maybe coming in from the left onto his right foot. But he's very comfortable kind of operating in these central areas. Colomboani very comfortable operating out wide, but easily, like I said, you could kind of swap these two in here. And those rotations just, again, allow for Spurs to just be able to unpick teams apart a little bit easier. That fluidity that I was talking about is so, so key for Thomas Frank moving forward in these games. Moani gets into a good crossing position here. Then Spence obviously does kind of join up to go on the overlap. Just pulls teams apart. And again, in the game against Copenhagen, where we generated our most amount of XG of the season, we saw a lot of the similar principles that we had yesterday in that, or on Saturday in that game against Brentford. Again, kind of that 3-2-5 build-up shape with these pivot players in here behind that kind of front two in the press, and then you've got four across the midfield for Copenhagen, again wanting to defend a little bit more narrow here. And look at the space our dangerous players are kind of operating in. Simons in that pocket there. And again, this felt so familiar to kind of Saturday, what we saw against Copenhagen. And it's no coincidence when we've set up in this manner, we've looked a hell of a lot better. And it's frustrating that Frank hasn't recognised that earlier on in the season against these kind of games when we didn't play the same way against Fulham. And again, it's key. Van der Ven playing that ball out to Odegaard, who like Colomboani, and probably more comfortable than Colomboani, he's very comfortable hugging the touchline. Then you've got Udogie, who's comfortable operating on the inside, as Djed Spence is as well. Djed Spence can be useful for Spurs, playing that left back from an attacking point of view, if he has got someone that is comfortable to hold the width. And then, as you see, you've got five across the front. Johnson kind of holding the width out there. Udogie can make that run, allows the space to kind of open up for Odegaard, and then Spurs can move and kind of play through the thirds as well, be a bit more braver. There's more bodies in central areas as well there. And now Udogie has now come out to the left-hand side to hold the width. Again, it's those rotations that are so key when you've got players that are comfortable playing on the inside and the outside in these kind of games. It just pulls teams apart a little bit more. Again, another example of it here, Spurs setting up 3, 2, and then 5 across that front in a slightly kind of different way. But you've got Johnson, Simmons. Oh, that's a terrible way of drawing it. Johnson, Simmons, Mwani, Odobert, and then Udogie is out here. Romero out to Porro, clips the ball over to Udogie, and again, Djed Spence is comfortable when he's got kind of space. We saw that in moments against Brentford on Saturday, he was comfortable playing the ball back on his left foot, and he's more dangerous when he's kind of got that space as well. And again, you see another example of it here, Van der Ven wrapping that ball out, and Udogie is picking up this channel. Djed Spence, I think, is comfortable doing this. He fires it into Spence. I think Udogie, sorry. I think Udogie may be slightly more comfortable in these areas, but I think Spence could take that on the half turn, pick it up, and move through those two midfielders and drive. Like Udogie, that is a really good skill set of his because he's played the inverted role under Ange for so long. And I do think we should go out and sign a left back that can that does have a lot of the same characteristics as Destiny. But I do feel like Spence, when he is playing with someone that doesn't just want to operate on the inside all the time, isn't comfortable operating solely on the outside or on the outside like Johnson, like Tell, like Xavi, I think Spence can play a part for us in these kind of games. Again, on transition, massive threat, Udogie, Odobert too, but I think Spence maybe won't go around the outside and shoot on his left foot, but I think he just is more comfortable when he's playing with someone that is comfortable kind of operating inside and outside. Again, Van der Ven out to Odobert, Udogie making this run in behind, Odobert stretching, Mwani can do this. Odobert can do this with Spence as well. I just think it's about those dynamics, and that's why Spurs, I think, have struggled in these kind of games so far up until this point against Brentford, where either we're kind of playing against the lower block, if we get this up, Brentford low block, or even when we kind of play against a team that is sitting in more of a mid block or is kind of pressing higher up against us. Those dynamics were a lot better on Saturday, and I think it's now like Thomas Frank developed a blueprint at Man City for the kind of games away from home. We hadn't seen it in the Arsenal game, which was really frustrating. PSG, it felt like another blueprint to kind of put in his pocket and use it again the way that we set up. And again, Brentford felt like a continuation of what we saw against Copenhagen. So it's been frustrating that we haven't seen that blueprint develop or be kind of used again up until this game against Brentford on Saturday. And I just think Thomas Frank has to trust with it, has to stick with it in these kind of games moving forward. Like Slavia Prague tomorrow, he's spoken about the fact that he's probably going to make some rotations to the team. Hopefully it's not too much because we don't play again till Sunday. It's just a chance to build a bit of momentum tomorrow, playing a similar structure, playing a similar style, getting players in their best positions to affect the game, but also for Spurs to structurally be able to cope with teams that sit in against us a little bit more as well, and just give us more familiar patterns to play when teams do press us. We've looked so much better in this shape. Copenhagen, Brentford are two biggest XG performances of the season at home, one in the Champions League, one in the Premier League. Obviously Brentford very similar to Burnley, but Burnley was slightly different. Burnley are poor, they are really poor. Brentford are a challenge. Like, I think Brentford are maybe better than Copenhagen. I think they probably are better than Copenhagen, so we can take a lot more from that game than even the Copenhagen one. So hopefully not too much rotation tomorrow. Hopefully a continuation of what we saw in this game and what we saw against Copenhagen in future games like this, where we have to be the dominant team, we have to be more of the aggressor, and hopefully Thomas Frank has learned now, and we can use Saturday as a platform to kick on and build upon against teams that have caused us problems in the way that Fulham, Wolves, etc. have. And I think we've caused a lot of our own problems in those games in that respect too. And now hopefully it feels like we've got a bit more of a consistent blueprint to build upon when we come up against more teams like this. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to like the video for me and subscribe to the channel and let me know your thoughts in the comments. See ya.